Redditors who have been on the brink of death, legally dead. Can you describe what it felt like? Story 1. There was an 18-wheeler. Fortunately, it was on a B road, not the highway, so not full speed, and we were hit perpendicularly, and as I looked over my right shoulder I saw the truck coming right at us. I watched it approach, slow-mo, and the last thing I remember is seeing the truck grill about an inch or so from my face, quite literally, right at the window. Then flashes of people, talking, people in my face, yelling, lots of blood. My front teeth were shattered. I shouldn't have watched the truck come at me. I might have saved my teeth. Apparently I come from tough stock, go Viking DNA. Because they brought me back somehow and I spent a few months recovering. But still have hip and knee problems and will require replacements. But I keep putting it off as I'm a firefighter and don't want that kind of downtime or PT and taking that much time off. If I become a liability, obviously, I'll have the surgery, but as long as it's just pain and not impairment. I'm going to keep running into burning buildings and being generally a stupid adrenaline junkie. But to circle back, it was a mix of exactly what you'd expect at an accident scene, which I am now very familiar with as I respond to them all the time from the other side of the fence. But what's really interesting is that while a lot of it is a mix of weird images, the time I was gone is just gone. No supernatural crap, but the memories, both like videos and pictures, are still incredibly vivid to this day, 25 years later. As I'm typing this, I'm seeing the truck grill 1 inch from my face, which also has some nice scars from the accident. I can remember every scratch, smudge, and ding on it. It's really quite odd. I was hurt the worst, fortunately, but aside from lingering pain that isn't so fun, all is well. Some people report weird stuff that makes them think they went to heaven. But for me, I was born an atheist and I continue to be one. The accident changed that part of me in no way at all. Perhaps those who want to believe get those images because the brain has some kind of mechanism to help you manage the shock. Who knows? I've always been a crazy adrenaline junkie, and oddly felt no fear watching the truck approach, so I think perhaps that to me, it was no different than some of the crazy crap I've done in my life before and after, so I just accepted it. Dunno, but the vividness of my memories a split second before the crash still astounds me. Then I took a nap and went to the hospital. Story 2. 1 minute I'm at a bar on a Friday night, the next I'm waking up in a chair in my apartment. My sister is there, there's an empty pizza box in front of me, and I'm wearing different clothes than I'd gone out in. I was mostly just confused for a minute until scratching an itch and finding an EKG lead stuck to my chest started to raise some real questions that finally culminated in my asking, what day is it? It was Monday at about 2:30 a.m. With the exception of about 8 hours where I was borderline dead, I was apparently up and about and talking the whole weekend. Just don't remember any of it. Don't even have the sense of time passing. It's like I traveled through time. Drugs are bad, okay. Story 3. Funny story. We were clearing an abandoned house on the outskirts of an abandoned village, town, hole in the desert, and I noticed evidence of something in a smaller adjacent room that looked like a camouflaged pressure switch on the floor. Just some random things piled up in an oddly specific way. Small boards, a book, a glass bottle, some cloth, etc. I stepped in the tiny room to check it out and boom. An RPG came through the wall of the larger room I had been standing in 1 second before and detonated the damned building around me. They tell me I was talking and apologizing for setting off the IED. I thought the pile of crap was covering up, but it wasn't me at all. If I hadn't been suspicious and stepped behind that extra bit of wall I would have been crispy. They said once they got me outside I passed out. I remember none of that though. Just boom. And then waking up 2 weeks later. Story 4. I was very ill with gallstones and getting prepped for emergency surgery when I suddenly realized I was dying. It was the most peaceful feeling ever. I put my soul in order, thought about the life I'd had and was at peace with the fact I probably wouldn't wake up from the anesthetic. It wasn't, at all, a feeling of impending doom, just a realization of a process having begun. Apparently I was about 30 minutes away from death when they opened me up. The surgeon who told me this said I made him sweat a bit, which is British English for fricking hell. I was crapping myself. I've read anecdotes from medical people recounting anecdotes that people who are going through a prolonged dying process, who say I'm dying in a calm way, usually go within the hour. Story 5. I'm an nurse. I.e. in the rest of the world. I've had a few people tell me that. Or, I feel cold or that they feel funny. Scares the crap out of me every time. They are usually right. 90% of the time they are right. Only sometimes do we succeed in fixing it. Medical science is good but not as good as everyone thinks it is. And I can tell you that people having an active heart attack or the ones about to go down from acute COPD exacerbations get a look in their eyes. I don't know if it's exactly a 1,000-yard stare, but that's what I call it. You just know hey, you're about to go unless you move your butt. Right. Now, story 6. The cold thing is certainly interesting. I am a 23Y, male in the UK, and on the 16th of July this year I woke up around 4:30 a.m. with this huge, horrible chest pain. Like, the pain woke me up. I did the whole male thing of trying to ignore it, and after 20 minutes it hadn't stopped and was getting worse to the point where I thought my heart must have been about to explode or something. I woke up my mom and my parents drove me to A&E just to be on the safer side. It was like 5 a.m. at this point, so pretty quiet, and I got seen straight away. Whilst I was waiting for them to set up the ECG, I began shivering and saying how cold I was. It was July, and in general, not that cold, probably quite a hot night, even. All of a sudden I had gone from his chest hurts, we're quiet, let's just run an ECG to be on the safe side, to about 3 people in the room, as though I was about to die any minute. I remember being all, it hasn't got any worse. I'm just really cold. And I didn't understand why feeling cold was a big deal. I guess maybe it's a sign of other things, sometimes. Story 7. A few years ago I had a major stroke. I had just gotten up and was in my kitchen making coffee. At first I felt like I had vertigo, and that I was going to fall over, so I sat down on the kitchen floor. Very shortly after that, I lost all feeling in the left side of my body, and my right side started to seize. My vision became doubled and everything sounded like it was underwater and a bit garbled. Luckily I wasn't alone when this happened. The guy I was dating at the time happened to be there and was able to call 911. I remember being very aware that I had lost control of my body and I could feel it shutting down. I was trying to talk and knew that I wasn't making any sense. When the paramedics arrived and started working on me, I remember being really concerned that my front door was open, and I didn't want my cats to get out of the house and get lost. I knew I was dying, but that is what I was thinking about. It was very surreal and confusing. When I arrived at the everything was a blur. Everything happened very quickly, and I felt really disoriented. I remember having my clothes cut off, being put into an MRI, not being able to breathe and panicking, having a breathing tube put in, people rushing around me and working on me. I think at one point they may have given me something to sedate me, but I'm not quite sure. I had this moment when I became hyper-aware that I couldn't feel my body at all anymore, and I couldn't see anything going on around me. I felt like I was no longer in my body, but I could hear the people around me talking and working on me, but they sounded very far away. I felt this overwhelming panic and realized that I couldn't communicate. I didn't know if I was still alive. I remember wanting to scream and not being able to. I remember wanting someone to just tell me that I was still alive, because I honestly didn't know if I still was. It was the most terrifying thing I have ever experienced. At some point I must have blacked out, or they must have given me something to knock me out. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in the ICU, surrounded by my family and doctors, waiting to see if I had any brain damage or paralysis. Luckily, that was not the case, and I came out of it relatively unscathed. Story 8. Tried to hang myself about a year and a half ago. When I put the belt around my neck, I felt happy and sure that I wanted to go through with it. I remember going unconscious, then opening my eyes, not knowing what was happening. It felt like the world was moving, most likely because I could kind of see my body flailing. But I felt numb and was terrified that I would go unconscious again before I could get the belt off of my neck. I was so scared. The good thing though is that I know how much I really do want to live after that. I know now that because of that fear I experienced, suicide is not what I truly want, even if I think it is sometimes. Story 9. My senior year of high school, I took some penicillin for an inner ear infection. I was a springboard diver. 8 minutes after taking it, I had 4 hives on my face. I walked approximately 7 yards to my kitchen where my mom was, and asked her should I be worried about these 4 hives. Her response was a look of shock and terror. In just a small amount of time, half my face had become covered in hives. After a few frantic phone calls, she rushed me to the hospital. When I arrived at the hospital roughly 21 minutes after taking the penicillin, I could barely breathe, and my eyes were almost entirely swollen shut. She helped me into the I collapsed on the floor after making it into the door. I remember hearing her scream for help. I remember trying so hard to see anything, but couldn't because my eyes were completely swollen shut. I remember trying to breathe but couldn't. My last memory was of being put on a stretcher and hearing a doctor yell that he needed some medicine pushed as fast as they could. Then there was nothing. I woke up 4 hours later. I didn't peacefully wake up and regain consciousness. It was violent and painful. They had pushed so much counteragent into my body that I was having violent full-body seizures that would last roughly 45 seconds. I had one every 4-5 minutes. The look of relief on my mom's face when I turned to her and asked if anything interesting was going on is something else I will never forget. She told me shortly after they got me on the stretcher my heart stopped. I was clinically dead for 58 seconds. She told me the seizures were painful to watch, and they started about 2 hours after I was brought back. I don't recall anything of the 4 hours. No white light, no sense of release, just a sadness that I would miss the rest of my life. The other part of it that I will always remember happened after I had been awake for a couple of hours. My dad was a police and SWAT officer at the time. He had no idea anything happened to me policy, so he wasn't distracted, and when he was told, he and 5 of his fellow SWAT officers were 2 blocks away. They all charged to the hospital. The memory of 6 fully loaded SWAT officers barging into my room to check on me is something I will never forget. Story 10. Mine happened after childbirth. I had a placental accreta that led to a massive bleed out. It was surreal. I saw in the mirror what was happening. I am a nurse. I knew full well, as I kept bleeding, what was happening. I felt my heart rate go up and my ears were ringing. It felt like 100 people were in the room getting ready to take me to the OR. I remember. A panic set in for a brief moment. Would my husband, kids, and new baby be okay without me? Then this overwhelming calm came over me. I could hear them all talking and the noises ... but it was dulled. Like hearing it all underwater. I knew that they'd be alright without me. I could feel it. I remember thinking, so this is how I die, and I was very okay with it. It was just peaceful ... as if I knew this fact, that I would die here and now, all along. I remember them rolling me out of the room, and I remember saying to my family, y'all will be okay and I love you then ... just blackness. It surprises me to this day how calm I was. It was almost euphoric and just. I lacked the right words. It felt like the most right or okay feeling I had ever had. I was shocked when I woke up about 12 hours later. Then the panic set in. I was screaming, "Where is my baby?" over and again. That part was awful. To this day I don't fear death. I am actually a hospice nurse now, a career move that, I fully believe, has influenced me from this time. I have learned through this and others that most people fear suffering ... not necessarily death. As for me ... it was so simple and calming. But I am certainly glad I am here. Story 11. I T-boned a minivan going 50 miles per hour on my motorcycle. I was in the right lane and didn't even have time to put my hand on the brake. The dude couldn't have timed it better. As soon as I saw that I was going to hit him, time slowed down. I knew I was going to die. I remember every millisecond of the accident too. I hit the van, and since I was on a CBRF4, my pelvis junk crushed the gas tank in by about 2 inches. This sent me up in the air and not straight into the van. If it was a Harley, I'd be dead right now. The witnesses say I flew as high as a telephone pole and about 50 feet out. I must have flipped in the air end over end with my extremities being pulled by centrifugal force about 6 times. All I remember seeing was dark, light, dark, light. I landed on the back of my head and rolled on my back. I blacked out after that. I was wearing a helmet and leather jacket. I didn't break a bone, but I wouldn't walk for 3 weeks. I knew I was going to die. It was the most peaceful moment of my life. I will never forget it. I completely gave up on life and allowed whatever was going to happen. It was beautiful. No one should fear death. Story 12. I've had 2 experiences. The first, I almost drowned when I was about 7. I got into water that was just barely too deep for me to stand tiptoe over, and sucked in water. From there it was absolute textbook distress swimming. Active drowning with me fighting to get every breath. I was terrified the entire time, and woke up on the pool site sometime later with no idea what happened. I still have nightmares about it. Very terrifying. Second time was actually pretty pleasant. I was a lifeguard for a large pool, something like 43 yards by 127, some oddly specific dimensions like that, and we had set fitness requirements. Part of that was swimming laps, and I managed to convince my head guard to let me pass on that week's laps if I could swim the 43 yards underwater in one breath. So I did a little warm-up, and then went for it. I made it probably 3/4 of the way at the bottom of the pool, about 12 feet deep IIRC, and really started feeling like I needed air. I fought through it, and then my fingers went warm and tingly, my ears got warm, and it felt like I was getting wrapped up in a warm blanket. Tunnel vision sank in, and I was just content with what was happening. At that point I knew it was time to get air, so I blasted off the bottom straight up, and managed to get some air at the very last possible second. I blacked out from there and don't remember how I got out of the pool, but all in all it felt great. I'm guessing it was endorphins. The point I'm trying to make is that if you can maintain control and not inhale a bunch of water, you can avoid the drowning response, and then your brain starts playing tricks on you. If you do inhale water, then yeah, your body goes into full-on panic mode and it's terrifying. Don't inhale water. Story 13. It was a few years ago, almost to the day. December 23, 2011 on Oahu. I had been there for a couple of days staying with my then-girlfriend's family. My parents had rented a house a few blocks over. We were all spending our first Christmas in Hawaii. I went swimming at Kalama Beach, and my girlfriend and her sister came with me. My parents and sister were on the shore. After about 5 minutes, the two of them went back in. I stayed because I hadn't been swimming in months and wanted to soak it in a bit longer. Maybe 3 minutes later I noticed I was just not where I thought I was. I was maybe 5 feet deeper into the water and 3 feet left of where I thought I was. Tide must be coming in, I thought. Better swim back to shore. So I did. Or I tried. I'd swim 10 or so strokes but then not get anywhere. I'd put my feet down and try to swim back in, but the tide was ripping hard on my legs. Come on, man, I said to myself, you're strong. Your whole family is here. Don't make a scene. Dig deep. Repeat 4-5 times, and suddenly I knew I was in trouble. I was physically drained, scared, and I was beginning to get disoriented. Worse, I couldn't feel the sand under my feet anymore. In retrospect, this made me feel like I was much farther out than I actually was. I was only about 15 feet into the water, but there was suddenly at least 6 feet of water between the sand and the surface. I finally signaled for help. My dad, sister, and girlfriend came running into the water, my dad up to his knees in front of me. My sister and girlfriend swam into my left. My dad was able to get just enough of a touch to push me farther to his right, which helped me break through the cresting waves that were beginning to suck me under. Now I was again on my own, fatigued and mentally spent, just trying to keep my arms moving. They'd pull 2 or 3 times, then stall, and I'd put my foot down to look for sand. This meant I was going under the water for 4 seconds at a time. then 6, then finally 10 seconds punctuated by timing my gasps for air. Everything started to go gray and I felt more and more relaxed but not at peace. I was still struggling, but there was this sense that this was it for me. That life would go on for everyone but me, that my family and my girlfriend's family would have a sad Christmas, that maybe Obama would catch wind of my drowning. This wasn't far from his vacation house at all and he was there at the time, but I just wasn't going to be there. There was a sense of acceptance or resignation than anything else. Finally, I caught a brief break in the waves and was able to catch 3 full breaths. I threw my whole body into it and swam as hard as I could to my left. I got about 4 or 5 strokes before I had to just hope against reason that I could get my foot onto something solid. And finally I connected. I was able to drag myself up to the shore and collapse in the shallow water. Chest heaving and adrenaline pumping strong, I had to be carried to a chair to sit upright because it felt like my head was going to explode. The next day, at our family's Christmas party, I pulled out the ring that I had hidden in my socks and proposed to my now wife. If I had died in the water, what was killing me the most is that she would have found the ring and been impossible depressed. Needless to say, I'm pretty happy with the way things turned out. Edit nearly drowned in a riptide in Hawaii, felt more resigned than peaceful but definitely relaxed. Proposed to my girlfriend the next day. Story 14. I almost died of dehydration. I hadn't had any food or water in 5 days, as I was recovering from surgery and kept telling myself I'd feel better the next day, and I'd be able to eat, drink then. Never happened though, and on the 5th day I remember waking up, knowing I was in trouble, and making my way downstairs around 9 a.m. to try and find my phone. I hadn't been able to talk for a couple days so I couldn't call for help, but I later found a text I'd typed out to my boyfriend saying I need to go to the ER. I don't remember typing that message and it hadn't been sent. The dehydration was the most excruciating feeling I've ever known in my life, not necessarily pain but worse, like my body was letting me know it was shutting down. I sat down and couldn't get up again, and all I could think was that it hurt so bad that I wanted to not exist until it stopped hurting. That's the last thing I remember. My boyfriend at the time came home 5 hours later and found me in the same spot, unresponsive and barely breathing. He tried to wake me but when he propped me up I fell face first onto the floor and didn't move. We lived about 2 blocks from the hospital, so he carried me to his car and rushed me to the ER. He said the nurses weren't sure if they'd be able to get an IV in me because my veins were so thin from dehydration, but they managed. I don't remember much of that week, and the time from when I sat down in that chair to when I woke up in the hospital is just blank. Like that time didn't exist for me. I'd always thought that once you got over the feelings of hunger, thirst, that dying of dehydration or hunger would be one of the less painful ways to die, but I was wrong. Even though it wasn't what we typically understand as pain, the way my body felt was the most excruciating thing I've ever known. And if I had to die now or feel that way for the rest of my life, I'd choose death. Story 15. I have told this story before here. Here is an updated story with more info on the near-death experience part. I had knee scope surgery. It was supposed to be simple, in and out the same day, no crutches even, just a week off work. So I limp out of the hospital, go home to my couch and my Xbox and nestle in for a week of gaming. The 3rd night after I am in so much pain I can't even think straight. We emptied every frozen item out of my freezer and covered my leg top and bottom from hip to ankle. No relief. I pound back 6 T3s in 30 minutes, no relief. I can do nothing but moan audibly throughout the night. No sleep, just agony. I go a couple of days like this. Finally my mom calls me to find out how the surgery went. I tell her the scoop and get the gears from her. I know you. You are just like your father. Go to the hospital, something is wrong. So, she made me promise to go to the hospital. I am in so much pain I am convinced the surgeon left something in my knee. I go, they do what they are trained to, dope drugs, they give me painkillers and ship me out. Another week of pain, go back again, same thing. Another week, more drugs. Finally I have had enough, my knee is twice the size of the other one and I am begging the doctor to help solve the problem. No help. I called the surgeon's office again and they said the same thing, just go down to the I lost it. The only way that I am going back to that hospital is if that man is waiting for me at the doors. I bellow. She puts me on hold for a second, then comes back on and says, okay, be there in an hour and he'll be waiting for you. I arrive, he is there with his resident. They get me in the room, ram a massive needle with a turkey baster-sized tube on it under my kneecap. They collect what seems like a liter of pus and crap and send it for cultures. The doctor tells me to wait an hour cause they might rush me into surgery. An hour goes by, not what we thought it was. Here are some anti-inflammatories. If it isn't better by Friday, come back in and we'll do a second surgery to find out the problem. In the meantime we are sending out more test cultures. Friday comes, no change, just agony. I am back in the hospital awaiting surg number 2. The doctor comes in and says, we have received some further test results back. The good news is we know what it is, the bad news is it isn't good. It turns out I had contracted a superbug version of staph infection during the first surgery. As the infection went undiagnosed for almost a month, my entire right leg was full of it. They call the specialist and rush me into surgery. They open me up and suck out as much of the infection that they can. The specialist has never seen that strain of staph before and recommends 12 milligrams of cloxacillin a day. That is some heavy-ass antibiotic. They cannot put it through an IV because it will collapse your veins, so he orders a PICC line, which means you lie on a table, then force a tube with a metal core into a larger vein in your arm and push it through the vein right into your heart. They X-ray you while you are on the table to make sure the line is in the right spot, then pull out the metal core. This leaves a straight tube into your heart to deliver meds. I live with this thing in my arm for a month and a half straight. It is hooked to a pump and bag after bag of antibiotics are pumped into me 24/7. Finally, I got cleared by the doctor to switch to a quarter dose which I can take orally. Which means for the first time in a month and a half I can have a shower without something dangling off my arm to a pump. I am stoked. I disconnect the pump to a level my home care nurse did every 3 days when we had to change out the line. But here is where it gets really interesting. The hospital built the PICC line wrong and gave me an open-end line. As I had a pump, I should have had a closed line that the pump would push meds through. This was never an issue before because the nurse was always working on it while I was sitting up resting. But when I disconnected it sitting on my bed, wrapped the PICC line site up in a garbage bag and tape, then stood up to hobble to the bathroom, there was nothing but a straight line of air directly into my heart. I get to the bathroom and the air embolism reaches my heart is shutting down, I am going into convulsions, my chest feels like it is on fire, and I know I am in serious trouble. I am making ungodly noises and I know I am dying. It was really weird, but I just knew I was close. No one has to tell you you are dying, you just know. I lost consciousness and had a spiritual experience. No white light, no family members, I saw death. As in the spirit of death. It is hard to put into words. But it was scared. I saw fear in his eyes. So a couple of years ago when I got a custom bike built I had the seat hand-tooled with a sugar skull and the tank painted to say death is a coward. I get rushed by ambulance to the ER and got to spend some time in the ICU. The doctors have no explanation as to why I didn't die. The cardiologist just kept saying things to me like, "You realize you almost died today, right? Or how are you dealing with this physiologically?" One hell of an experience. Story 16. Regularly went swimming at a rock quarry in my hometown. It was rumored to be over 500 feet deep, but we talked to a couple scuba divers out there one day who assured us it was 60 feet at its deepest. A few friends and I decided to try and go to the bottom. We did this often in lakes and whatnot. Gotta bring some dirt up to prove you did it kinda thing. So 6 of us stood in the water. Our biggest friend Clay held onto a huge rock and just stepped off the ledge where it vertically drops. I grab hold of his leg and so do the other 4 guys. About 20 feet down 2 guys turn back to resurface, shortly followed by 2 more. So at this point it's just me and Clay. I can still see around me because quarry water is crystal clear, but it's getting increasingly colder. We finally hit rock bottom and in a split second Clay and I exchange glances and he mouths "oh crap," and then shoots off back to the top. I follow suit and am still pretty confident that we are fine. After swimming for what seems like forever the water is getting warmer and warmer. I start letting more air out as I think I am almost to the top. Nope. The sun is shining brightly, water is almost hot in comparison to the depths of the quarry, but I am out of air. Everything starts going black. I go into fight or flight mode where I can't hear or see anything. But my body is still paddling. My mind is literally shutting down, and I can't help but think I'm going to die right now, and nobody will know. When I finally break the surface, I have done a lot of sketchy crap in my life, but nothing has ever come close to that experience. Story 17. Years ago, I had an ex who was very abusive. We were in a hotel room with some of his friends and an underage lover of his, and I wanted to leave. I was so fed up. When I tried to walk about, he threw his arm around my neck. He had used this to punish me all the time because he knew it was what I hated most, but he didn't let go. It felt like I struggled for hours. Everything went black, then it felt like I was breathing water. It's hard to explain, not like drowning, just breathing water like it was a normal thing. I was floating, I could see a waterfall. I've never felt anything more serene. It was beautiful. It made the contrast of when I woke up. I'm not sure if I was truly dead, but his scumbag friends were all freaking out when I came to. I was told I was out for more than a minute, no life in my eyes, not breathing. He has supposedly breathing into my lungs until I woke up. I was in so much pain. Breathing hurt, no amount of air was enough, I was covered in blood. I was sitting in my own crap for a few minutes before I realized. I was dragged to the shower. I looked at myself in the mirror while I was in there. My face was purple and continued to be for a few days. My eyes were red. After sitting under the water for a while, I was dragged to a bed. For a day I could barely move. He used this opportunity to forcibly cuddle with me. Ask me if I wanted things, bring me them, like he was some sort of saint for tending to my needs. He called me his zombie girlfriend. I felt more dead awake than when I was out. Story 18. I almost drowned in a local river that has strong currents the closer you get to the center of the water. I got caught in the current and couldn't swim out nor grab something to hang on to. I couldn't hold my breath any longer, so death began to sink in once my mouth was full of water. Natural instincts to open your mouth for air, but it broke my brain, me knowing all I was gonna get was water. At some point I saw someone dive underwater near me and pull me out. It was my cousin who had to walk me back to get back to the rest of the party with my family. I was in a daze for the rest of the day. My dad freaked the heck out if I remember correctly. Nobody knew I was seconds from being dead. I don't like strong currents unless it's a water park. How it felt, I was just a kid who didn't understand life and death yet. I knew how to swim and was taught to just keep your head above water. It sucked not knowing how to feel. I didn't cry, but I had a lot of questions about life after that. Story 19. Back in 2009 I was T-boned by a 2010 Yukon that was going 50 miles per hour. My brother was driving. Fire department had to cut me out of the vehicle and airlift me to the hospital. I suffered a broken rib which could have possibly been from the initial CPR. In total my injuries were a diffuse axonal head injury, major TBI, a crushed pelvis, grade 4 laceration of my right kidney and liver. My right tibula and fibula were snapped in half, a punctured lung from broken rib. My bladder exploded. The V-walls of my lady parts were sliced to shreds by my broken pelvis. The went as far as to ask my mother if I was an organ donor the second day of my stay. I was in and out of the ICOR and ICU for the first month of my stay. Grand total I was in the hospital for 5 months. This doesn't include outpatient rehabilitation. I even had an out-of-body experience, which was really cool because I've talked to a few who've had experiences like mine. But this one guy had an extremely similar one. What did it feel like? I remember seeing the car as it was about to hit me. But instead of acknowledging it, my attention was quickly turned to a bird landing in a tree. The doctors said this is what may have saved me. C. My body didn't stiffen up to brace the impact. I was soon after knocked unconscious and only remember being in the hospital with an insurmountable amount of nerve damage on my right side. Leg that felt like even the slightest touch was a steak knife dragging through my flesh. I can't imagine what it might have been like had I not been on a lot of drugs. Emotionally, I was really depressed while I was in the hospital. I didn't recognize family members or friends. I did recognize my then BF. I called him my husband, which now he is. When I left the hospital, my depression only got worse. I was reminded of how active my lifestyle was and the fact that I was bound to a wheelchair at the time. I was determined to get better and return to my life. I did, thankfully, and am mostly back to where I was physically prior. I used to be incredibly flexible, putting my feet behind my head, feet behind my ears flexible, and while I still am flexible, the hospital put 6 screws in my 2 right knee, 2 ankle, and 2 coccyx, so this does make a bit of difference. My out-of-body experience was something else. Let me just say that I'm not a religious person, and am still not. I remember standing in a line of PPL, surrounded by a murky bluish-white. There was no dimension anywhere, but I was fixed to a surface that everyone else was fixed to. At the front of the line there was a really tall podium that stretched as far as I could see left and right. Like the line and myself, it was fixed to the same surface that wasn't there. There were about 3 rows of individuals, again as far as I could see left and right, sitting on the podium. I recall them staring at me, almost judging me. Then I remember being at the front of the line, with PPL waiting their turn behind me. One of the male judges looked at me and addressed me by the name everyone calls me, not my legal name or a weird nickname, but almost in a more personal manner. He said, "Well, Holly, are you ready?" At that moment I burst into tears because I knew he was asking me if I was ready to die. My face was in my hands and all I could think about was my nephews and my BF. I looked up and said, "No, I can't leave them." The judge asked me if I was sure and I said yes. That's all I really remember from my experience. I also remember seeing myself in my hospital bed, not from a first-person point of view or the second, but the third. I had an aerial view of my hospital room. The light was off and my husband was leaning over me crying. No one else was in the room. I don't believe in an afterlife or anything religious, so I know that the out-of-body experience I had was just my subconscious trying to communicate to me what little I had of a conscious self. Hey, you're about to die unless you start fighting. I know this will probably be lost in your hundreds of comments, but I hope to share my experience to help you gain any insight you're looking for. However, if you try to make a movie or any profit from this, I will come after you. Just kidding, but not really.